After my dad passed away, my stepmom left her 6-year-old with me and disappeared without a word. 3 years later, she finally comes back, but when I give her this news, she bursts into tears. My parents divorced when I was just 6 years old. My mom and dad would fight all the time. They were clearly not happy in their marriage and would take their frustrations out on each other. Though they were never too violent, their loud shouting and verbal abuses did leave an emotional scar on me. My happy place was whenever I went to school. I would go to school and watch kids sitting happily, talking about their lives, while I dreaded going back home. My mom would constantly complain to me about how much she hated her life with us. She was a homemaker, and after doing all the household chores, she would sit on the sofa for hours watching TV. Looking back, I do think my mom suffered from depression because she hardly ever got up from the couch unless she had to go to the bathroom. She didn't even bother to check if I ever had lunch after coming back from school since my school was only a block away. My classmate's mother would pick us up and drop us off together. My mother would remain on the couch until it was time for her to cook dinner. Even though my mom tried her best, she was not the best cook. Her dishes would sometimes have too much or even no salt at all. As you can imagine, Dad hated this as much as me, which would be generally how they would start arguing. If my dad ever brought back takeout, not always but sometimes, my mom would throw a fit and say how she could cook better than all those filthy restaurant people and how he was just throwing away money. Their arguments would then lead to them throwing insults at each other's families and insecurities. My dad would say how my mom sat on the couch the whole day like a potato, and my mom would mock my dad for not earning enough. Well, this was pretty much my childhood until they got divorced. I was quite happy about their divorce, actually, and didn't even flinch when they informed me one night during dinner time. However, my lack of emotions made my mother really pissed. She started questioning if I was a psycho for not having any emotions, and when I replied that I did but was happy with their decision to be separated, she started yelling and accusing me of being just as selfish as my father and not caring what happened to her. She went off on how no one in the family loves or respects her and that she is done with all of us. Her accusations came out of nowhere, and I could not understand what I did to bear the brunt of it. During the divorce proceedings and custody battle, my mother was finally diagnosed with bipolar disorder and depression after she went for a psych evaluation due to her increasing mood swings. She was deemed unfit to be a parent, so my dad was awarded full custody. The judge informed my parents that if she ever turned her life around with proper medications and got a job, then she could have a chance to win back custody in the future. However, until then, I would be the sole responsibility of my dad. My dad and I moved into a small flat near his workplace, which was much further away from my school, so I had to opt for a school bus for going to and from school. The locality wasn't that good, and the neighbors were too loud. My dad would reassure me that this was only temporary and that he would take up extra shifts to make sure that he could give me a better life. True to his word, in a year we moved into a much better locality. This is when he met my stepmother, Stephanie. Stephanie, or Steph as she liked to be addressed, seemed like a wonderful person. She was our neighbor and had 2 dogs, which I loved, because whenever she would come over to meet my dad, I could play with her dogs. Slowly, day by day, I watched my dad and Steph get closer to each other. She was quite respectful to me during this time and would stay out of my way mostly. However, things changed when she started spending a few nights over at our place. Then, suddenly, she had a problem about why I was watching TV after finishing all my homework, why I wasn't helping my dad with the dishes, or why I didn't cook my own meals. Mind you, I was just 8 years old, and I understand that children should be taught early to be independent, but I just feel like 8 years old is too young. I could hardly stand above the kitchen counter, but she would force me to wash my own dishes or yell at me if I forgot. I wish my dad could have noticed these red flags and avoided her. However, he was love-struck, maybe because he had been lonely for so long. When Steph finally moved into our place with all her dogs, she told me that I needed to move out of my bedroom because her dogs needed a place to live. My dad and I were shocked that she would even suggest something like this, and my dad tried to reason with her that this was my bedroom and there was no reason why the dogs couldn't sleep in the living room or even in their bedroom during nap time. But Steph tried to justify how the dogs needed to have their own space since she had always given them an entire bedroom and told me how it would be fun for me to live in the closet under the staircase. I threw a tantrum and started to cry because I was terrified of living in that dark space. This led to Dad and Steph having an argument, and she started to threaten how she would move out, but my dad told her how her demand was ridiculous. So, in the end, they compromised when my dad proposed that he would build a small house for the dogs in our backyard. Steph agreed, but she was clearly pissed at me for not giving in to her demands. She would not let me play with her dogs after that and would yell at me even if her dogs came near me. I did notice that immediately after Steph moved in, she left her job. I don't know if my dad and she ever had a conversation, but she never continued her job when she started living with us. This is how she had too much time on her hands to complain about me or find issues with me. I think she saw me as an unwanted object in my dad's life and would constantly ask me why my mother abandoned me or why I could not live with my mother instead. My mother had not even once contacted me since the divorce, nor did I have any interest in getting in touch with her. Steph started finding reasons to complain to my dad about me more and more. She would have an issue if I didn't clean my room according to her standards or stayed out a bit too late with my friends from the neighborhood during the weekend. Whenever my dad and I went to watch any Disney movie, because he knew how much I liked watching those, she would tag along but then try to convince my dad to buy tickets for another film in the ticket booth. My dad never obliged, which I guess must have pissed her off even more. If you're wondering why my dad was ever with a woman like her, it was because other than their arguments about me, Steph and my dad had a loving relationship. They were a pretty solid couple, but I don't know what it was about me that made her tick off so much. When I turned 11 years old, according to Steph, I was too quiet and too introverted for my age. She would constantly complain about how she was embarrassed I wasn't a popular kid at school. She would also plunge into a story about herself and how popular she used to be because she was a cheerleader. Steph would also have issues with me sleeping too much during the weekend and not helping her out enough around the house. I did try to make efforts to improve whenever I could. I set alarms to wake up earlier so I could get ready for school on time or wake up early on the weekends and help wash the dishes, walk her dogs, or literally offer help with anything she wanted. However, no matter what I did, there was always something for her to criticize about me. Her negative words started to affect me so much that I started feeling anxious around her for no reason. To give you an idea of how much it affected me, during the worst times of my anxiety, the critical voice in my head sounded like her voice. It was that bad. For years, she once accused me of being very selfish because I ate a lot of food during a family event. Steph had invited her parents and her side of the family for a barbecue. I had just come back home after playing basketball with my friends, and like every other teenager, I was probably really hungry. She took me aside and told me how it was selfish of me to eat this much food when this was not meant for me to begin with. I pointed out to her how my dad had bought all this, but she started to whisper angrily at me that I was being a bad stepdaughter, and I should not embarrass her in front of her family by eating so much.